Unfortunately, today is going to be a very sad day for, well, a lot of charities and community groups all across the UK. Because today is unfortunately the day that EU funding for these charities and community groups comes to an end. After today, that's it. Friday, the 31st of March, that is it. No more funding. And instead, these community groups and charities will now have to rely on the UK government. And of course, you may remember during Brexit that there were all these promises from Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, that all this money was easily going to be sort of re-given to all these groups. Don't worry about all this funding that we currently get from the EU because it'll all be replaced. And instead, what we've got is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, a fund that is meant to be announced today and how this is meant to be allocated. But as we've already said many times, the levelling up. No, none of this money has been matched, even exceeded, or even come close to replacing the amount of money many of these community groups and charity groups need to be able to help fund these vital services. And bear in mind, they have had to step up because of austerity. So many of these charities and community groups, after the Conservative government had basically cut all this funding to the bone for local councils to help provide these types of services, charity groups and these community groups had to step in. So they got their funding from the EU. Now that's no longer there. What do you think's going to be the consequence? Unfortunately, a lot of people are now going to be left without even the help or support that they need in so many worse ways, and it's just going to make things even worse. And of course, the government will say, "Oh yes, we are with the Shared Prosperity Fund." But as I said, it's the money that they are sort of suggesting to replace this EU funding is but a drop in the bucket of what they used to get. So this is going to be a massive loss. This is going to be a massive loss today, and there are going to be a lot of charities, unfortunately, today. Not just charities, but community groups. At the end of today, potentially will be the last day that they open their doors. And to be honest, that is incredibly sad. That is incredibly sad that this has happened. And it's because of Brexit. So, as always, before we go diving into talking about this article and a bit more about stuff that's going on in this sort of situation, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is the links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button, and of course the Pony Club as well down below too. So, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel that way. And of course, on with today's story. So, this comes from the BBC with the title of Brexit. EU funding for charity and community groups to end. There we go. So, community groups in Northern Ireland are expecting to find out on Friday what they will get to replace the millions of pounds of EU funding. Many have expressed fears for their future as long-running funding streams now come to an end. The cash from the European Social Fund is due to stop in the UK on Friday as a result of Brexit. It is expected to be replaced by the UK government's Shared Prosperity Fund. But BBC News Northern Ireland understands that the decisions involving the funding, about the £57 million over 2 years from this fund, will be outlined on Friday. The UK Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities is understood to be making more money available than the £42 million over the next 2 years originally advertised to try and tackle the economic inactivity. However, the new scheme is still expected to be oversubscribed. Declan Donnelly, the chief executive of the Derry Youth and Community Workshop, has said that they had no hope whatsoever of the replacement UK government funding, and it would not be enough to keep his staff in work. He said that the 25 members of his staff would lose their jobs on Friday. We are now only 1 day away from the end of the programme, but they haven't even said anything other that they are working hard to try and finalise it, Mr. Dockley said. I really have no faith in them. Sarah Bowden runs the Greater Village Restoration Trust in South Belfast. The organisation works with young people with complex needs who are not in education, providing them with training support and pathways to employment. I've worked here for 17 years and I've never been in this situation before, she said. If you came and looked at the young people that we've worked with the prospect of losing this service, it is shameful. It is not just training, it's a safe space and a lifeline for those young people. And for that to be taken away from a community already suffering from the deprivation, it is a scandal. Our politicians should be ashamed of themselves. Barry McClellan, the regional operation manager for MENCAP, said that the ESF provided 2/3 of its annual funding of about £700,000. And Mr. McLaren said that the charity would still be functional once the EU money ended, but it would be a skeleton service. He said, we are now having to reduce our service and how we can actually support people by over 2/3, he said. We've reapplied for the funding from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, but we still have no indication if we have been successful or not. Regardless, if we are successful, it still means there will be a gap in funding. Liam DeCallum, the chief executive of the Clan Group, which runs programs across Northern Ireland and is based in Newry and South Down. The group has had to put 50 of its 130 staff on to protective redundancy notices since January. 2 of those are a husband and wife, he said, Mr. Dowling. You can only imagine their situation coming into work this morning. I can point to staff that have had a vocation as opposed to a job, and they are all very invested in what they do. They are all very invested in the people and what we serve, he said. Mr. Mr. McCavstack said the chief executive of the Northern Ireland Council for Voluntary Action said the funding was absolutely essential to making Northern Ireland society work. He said that the ESF was used by over 67 members and represented by the council and amounted to over 1,700 employees. We have been inundated with emails and telephone calls and meetings with our members who are angry and frustrated, and they're feeling disrespected. They are feeling undervalued. They don't think anyone wants to feel like that, and no matter where they work, she added. The Northern Ireland Department for Enterprise, the spokesperson, said the department emphasised these concerns of the entire sector, but had no ability to even finance their work beyond the end of March. It said that the UK government had made clear that the decisions made and the allocations to the projects would be made solely by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communications. The EFS funding support was due to end in 2022, but the DEF extended that support to March of 2023 to provide a cliff edge and to give the DCHU time to provide replacement funding in place, the spokesperson added. The Department of Funding for Level Up and the Shared Prosperity Fund would, at minimum, match previous EU funding in Northern Ireland. Again, it's barely even been announced. And at the time of doing this, it's barely been announced. And that's just Northern Ireland. And that's just Northern Ireland. Imagine what is happening today from various charities and community groups. And that's very sad, to be honest, that this was one of the big things we talked about the numerous fundings and organizations. So you've got there was a big business one. There was tons of funding we got from the EU that and now no longer available. No longer available. And yet the government has said, oh, don't worry, we'll replace these fundings or we'll match it. It has not done so. And instead, you got the levelling up fund where councils have had to try and compete against each other for basically scraps dropped from the table of Michael Gove. Do you think the Shared Prosperity Fund is going to be any different when it probably gets announced later today? I very much doubt it. This is going to be disastrous. The effects of this are going to be disastrous. If you may remember sort of the effects of austerity and charities and these community groups having to step in to provide the services that the councils used to be able to fund, but they couldn't anymore because of austerity. What do you think's now going to happen to all these things? Now that these charities and community groups, some may be able to continue running, but as we saw there, having to cut what they can provide by 2/3, having to slash huge members of staff. it the social impact from the loss of many of these charities and community groups is going to be absolutely devastating for some of these areas. Absolutely devastating. But that's just another fallout from Brexit. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can well buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.